Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to FreeThought Hour. So this is the show I share with my co-host Tercia in South Africa. How the devil are you, Tercia?
I am in Cape Town. Why do I have it? Oh, there it's gone. Thank you. I'm in Cape Town. We're actually visiting with my brother-in-law. So I'm in their study. There's a massive dart game going on upstairs that I'm losing out on. Fortunately, I'm not a player. Yes, the senior, the fathers are playing against the so it's a father and it's an elderly man and niece and father and son team taking on one another.
Okay.
So we'll see how that goes.
Crossing the generations. Well, of course, last week we had the world dart champion announced, who is 17.
What?
Yes, he's been playing since he's 2. He was first throwing darts with nappies on.
Can you believe that?
Yeah.
But
anyway,
introduce our guest.
Let's introduce our guest. Yes. Jaco, how are you?
Hi, I'm okay. Thanks for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Good. Well, you're very welcome. You're in South Africa too, and we've got some funny crackling going. If you can hear that, guys.
It's my dog chewing a bone. If you don't mind.
Dog chewing bone.
It's okay. She's okay. Yeah, she was fine. I think it's her own butterflies, but yeah, she's rooting for me and everybody. So yeah, it's okay now.
Both of us may be invaded by kittens shortly, so it's quite an animal-friendly show. Anyway,
I don't feel that it's not that crackling is not us.
Well, I don't know. It's very loud. I don't know whether it's an effect of the connection or what. But anyway, we have it, so we'll have to soldier on as best we can.
Not sure.
Yeah, I don't think it. I have no idea. I've never experienced that before. It was fine beforehand. There was nothing like that before we started.
No, that's right. Yeah.
It's just as
let me just
not chewing anymore, so it's not.
Let me just do some muting of microphones and see where it's coming from.
Okay.
Testing. 1, 2, 3. Is it me?
No, it's not you, and it's. I don't know where it's coming from because
it's not Jaco either because John started before.
No amount of muting stops it. So we'll just have to put up with it. It's somewhere between us on the line. Anyway, Jaco, I don't know much about you because Tercia fished for you and caught you. So can you fill me in a bit? I know you're a professor of ancient theology, biblical. Tell me, what is it?
Okay, so yes, at the moment I'm an associate research professor at Northwest University. It's basically in ancient texts. That's the school where we belong. And it's for practical purposes, you can call it Old Testament, but it's a bit more complicated than that. So basically, most of my time is devoted to research, but it involves biblical scholarship, philosophy, and other ancient languages and so on. And I'm at one of the campuses of the Northwest University in South Africa.
Right. I'm just trying to reduce background noise and see what I can get going. So, but you've also had a very interesting personal history, I understand. And this is what we like to ask people about, their journey, how they got to be the person they are today. Would you like to give us a potted history
John, can I make a suggestion? I know it's taking time off our broadcast, but okay.
Yes.
The sound is really, really bad. Do you think it will help if we go down and then perhaps come in again? Because I can hardly hear what you're saying or what you are saying.
Okay.
So,
It stopped.
It may help if one person is speaking that the other people.
Jaco, let's try that suggestion of Tertius. Could you go and come back?
And I'm also going to go and come back.
Okay,
Yes, I can.
great.
All right.
So I'm kicking them from the studio, and then they'll come back. We've never had this before. It's the trouble with technology. It's great when it works. And not so good when it doesn't. So, Tertia, are you coming back? I'm sorry to viewers that this has happened. Right, here's Jaco back.
How about now?
Oh, that sounds really good. No crackling.
I thought it might be the rain because we're having a thunderstorm as well, but maybe it's not that.
Yes, it could even be God in the sky, couldn't it? Who knows?
Of the gaps
Yes.
or the cracks.
Missy is coming back. She needs to connect her devices.
Okay.
Here she comes. Great. I think we're in business when she gets here.
Let's hope so. We may not have Moses' law, but we still have Murphy's law. So
That sounds much better on my side.
It is much better. Yes. Damn that Murphy. I think that's his problem.
Now that we are clearly audible, I can just perhaps fill in our audience. I heard Jaco on a podcast, must be about 8 years ago. In fact, I don't even recall. It's a fairly unknown atheist podcast. I don't know if you can remember even which one it was, Jaco, but I heard your story on that podcast, and your story resonated with me for several reasons. Not only one being that I was also a student at Potchefstroom University. We must have been there at the same time, although we never met. And both of us were fundamentalist Christian believers who turned out via different routes, but both of us turned out to be non-believers. But what I found so gripping about Jaco's story is how traumatic the experience of losing faith was for Jaco, and that resonated with me. And then, of course, the knowledge, the wealth of knowledge that Jaco has about the Old Testament, and I would dare say Jaco is almost a South African equivalent to Dr. Stavrakopoulos. What's her name? Francesca. Jaco would be perfectly able to write a book like The Anatomy of God. And he has done that in many of his similar things in many of his academic papers. And that's a couple months ago, towards the end of the year, November, Jaco and I met because he came down to the Cape Province, and we spent, 4 hours sitting under the trees at one of the beautiful venues here in close to Worcester. And it was, it's just amazing to hear the knowledge and the understanding of the scriptures and ancient texts and ancient languages that Jaco has. So that's why I felt that it would really be worth our while to hear Jaco's story, and perhaps in the time left to us to dip in and sit at the feet of a very knowledgeable person.
Thank you so much, Tasha. And yes, so I won't go into all the details, but if I can summarize, I think the podcast I was on, if I remember correctly, the sound was also a bit of a problem that time. It was one of the other podcasts also discussing atheism, and so I've been on a few, but not so much recently. So my journey, how can I say? Just a minute. Just 2 seconds, please. Apologies.
Jaco has trouble with lighting. So
No, yeah, sorry. Sorry. I don't know if you've seen that biologist Robert Sapolsky. He always has dogs at his interviews, so I just want to comment down. Okay, so yeah, I grew up in South Africa in the Dutch Reformed Church. My parents were Christians, and I went to church because they did, but I wasn't. How can I say? Just 1 second again. Sorry.
baby animals.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, it's no shame. She's okay. So I grew up in the Dutch Reformed Church, and basically at the time I remember that for the most part the church. Sorry.
Just let her join us.
Okay, as long as the sound is not interfering. So I grew up in the church, and for the most part it was rather boring. I couldn't really, you sit through the Sunday services and so on, and then what happens is you go there because your parents go there, and I distinctly remember that it wasn't until I was about 12 that I don't know how or what, but it probably to do with the psychology of adolescence. But I had like this experience, what you can call a conversion experience, but it was not the normal one. It was like from reading. I always liked reading, so it was from reading the book of Revelations, which of course I didn't understand, but the imagery just fascinated me. And it was like this fantasy world, but almost like a socially sanctioned fantasy. So it was all these images that was actually the truth as well. Now, later I found out that my interpretation was wrong. So I was actually had these experiences based on a wrong interpretation, which was another disillusionment. But at the time, it certainly felt real, as only a kid's imagination can be. And even internally, all the what you would call in that born again experiences, the feeling that you're have the Holy Spirit, the feeling that your personality is that you really believe, and everything is very real, and that it's not a drudgery anymore. So it's completely real. I especially love the idea of the second coming. When I heard it first, I always thought, every time I saw these cumulus clouds both on the horizon, and because they always said it can happen any day, I mean, every day was exciting.
Right.
And so,
can I pause you there? Because
yes.
you've said a couple of things that really intrigues me. It sounds as though you're describing a sort of personal revelation rather than the conventional born again experience, because as far as I understand it, the Baptist born again experience is dunking people bodily into water, into a river.
Yeah.
And
no, this was more like a subjective psychological experience of feeling different and really liking a religion and really being completely convinced that it's all real, liking reading the Bible, of course, bit by bit, loving going to church, getting something out of every sermon, you just want to commit. It's like, not only is it does society tell you this is the most important thing, but you also like it and you want to devote your entire life to it. And
Right.
it's real, and you become aware that this is not how everybody experiences it. Many people are just there because they are there, and I can't explain it completely. So
Right. So it's a psychological event of committal
yes,
to the narrative that you've been fed.
yes. So there's probably a lot of psychological variables involved there. And with imagination and everything, I always had this idea that I used to read Revelation and some parts of the Bible, especially the New Testament, having to do with the second coming and everything. And it just, my imagination just ran away with me. The world around me was suddenly, it felt like I was completely convinced of the supernatural. I just felt different. I was happier. Everything was real. I was always excited. I wanted to talk to people about this.
Right. Right.
It
So
became almost my sole interest, actually.
your mission.
And it wasn't part of a group experience or a camp or anything. It was this introvert reading and just having all these.
Interesting.
And I started actually liking everything about religion and so. And since then, I just wanted to be a missionary so that everybody could have this. I don't know. It was so meaningful at the time.
Wonderful feeling. Yes.
Yeah, it was. So just to jump. So since then, I was roughly in high school. I was one of my family members was already at the University of Pretoria. He was teaching in one of the theology subjects, and he told me that since we are in the Dutch Reformed Church, if I wanted to be a missionary, the ideal thing, although you can be a missionary in some outreaches and so on, the best thing would be to study theology and then being ordained and then having your working in a congregation and having them send you, or working for an organization within the associated organizations, but having a solid foundation in theology.
Yes.
So I was really looking forward to all that. And but during high school, because it was such a passion, almost an obsession, I couldn't stop devouring popular literature. And most of the popular literature in South Africa at the time, in the bookshops, were, if they were not Afrikaans, various traditions, and if they were often at the time American conservative evangelical or Pentecostal type literature.
Yes.
So I used to listen to the radios in the morning and the evenings, the John MacArthur shows, you could say I was that had a great effect on me on how I saw the Bible and what I thought it meant to be a true Christian, and it just felt that it resonated with me. So I went to study, and during my studies, obviously there's a lot of new information. You learn all the languages, biblical scholarship, Old New Testament, and all the other subjects. But even though at the time the professors and the lecturers were of different views, and you get exposed to a lot of ideas, but for the most part, what they do is they will teach you certain approaches and perspectives, but mostly as an undergraduate and afterwards, it's more about learning what's out there. So they don't try to, they assume you're going into this church and there's already divisions, but what they're trying to teach you is what is happening in research. And of course, with their own preferences and so on. And that was never really so much a problem. I thought they were a bit liberal, and because I always read apologetics, so I always thought I had the answers and I always had the reasons why they're wrong in certain things they said. So that never bothered me. But I was happy to learn that I was a fundamentalist in the sense of what I later learned James Barr used it. So it's not about taking the text literally or so on. Fundamentalism essentially at the time, although the concept changes over time, was about belief in the inerrancy of scripture and having it as a base. So if that is not your source of knowledge of God, then you don't have anything really, and everything has to be built on it.
Right.
So
And you went to theological study at university or college?
Pretoria, yeah, the University of Pretoria.
Yes.
So I did that, and at that time you had to do some humanities subjects as well. So I did philosophy as a choice. Some other people chose psychology or sociology.
Yep.
I also did the languages further, especially the Semitic languages, the Hebrew and other Near Eastern languages. But in my fifth year, because I was always reading during the holidays more theology and more apologetics, I once happened upon a book that was called, I think, Beyond Fundamentalism, which was, I don't know if it was the UK or the US title, but the other title was Escaping from Fundamentalism of the same book. So I happened upon Beyond Fundamentalism. And it was written by James Barr, and I thought that means next level fundamentalism.
Uh-huh.
So I thought because I was exposed to all these different views, I was never really at a crisis of anything. I just realized I wanted to know that I'm like the best possible version of Christianity and the true form of Christianity, like going deeper and deeper into its essence, so that
Uh-huh.
and when for the first time, what that book does or did is it's not that it tries to convert you to some liberal view of the text. It's more like the author shows an understanding of fundamentalism. It meets you where you're at. Like you have these verses that you like, you have this view, and for the first time, everything that you've learned about more critical perspectives, where you always judge them because they have all these heretic conclusions, or they are based on certainness, you think they're flawed because they assume the text is just human, or they assume there's contradictions. What James Barr did was connect the dots in a way where he showed me that, that's what I got from the book, is that fundamentalism is not as biblical as it thinks. What it is defending is not the text itself, it's a view of the text. And that what it's believing in is not just the God of the Bible, but a certain concept of God from the history of the concept. And so I always knew these things in theory, but the way he explained it, and some South African authors like Herman Dice and others also tried, but the way he did it was, for the first time I realized that, and it took a while to sink in, because I was not going to just let myself be convinced otherwise, because this was who I am. But the way he explained it, because you also have this ethics that you shouldn't deceive yourself, you shouldn't be worshipping idols or the wrong view. I still read him because you have to know what your opponents say so that you can meet them with your own apologetics. So then I went back to the apologetics of all the people who try to refute some of the critical views, and I knew what they said, and then it got me thinking, and then I read some of what James Barr said, and it's not that I accepted everything he said, it's just that when I went back to he writes in such a way that he also tells you the way fundamentalists deal with these problems and why they deal with it like that. So I could see that, and so I never got answers on what I should think from James Barr's book, or was converted to some form of liberal theology. All I got was valid critique of fundamentalism. That
right. So
over time, yeah.
He opened you to the possibility that there are different interpretations of the Bible.
Not so much. That I already knew. What he opened me up was that fundamentalism is not biblical in the sense that it claims to be, and that the way it deals with problems related to the Bible is not open to wherever the text may lead or so, because it comes to the text with a presupposes the prepositions, and whatever contradicts that, it means that you have to find fault with your interpretation, or you have to presuppose a concept of God, a view of the Bible, and any reading that contradicts it, then the problem is with the reading or the
Yeah.
so on. So So what I learned was, because one also learns from the history of the concepts of God and Scripture, that this view that and these views of, so for the first time it opened me up to the possibility that the very thing I wanted to be more and more biblical is I don't know what all the answers are, but there's some problems with the view I'm having.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that got me reading further. So a lot of books, and then now you slowly it begins to sink in. There's a little crack here and a little crack there,
Yes.
and you
Yeah.
start reading more on
Mm.
various things, all the theological subjects, because you want to. You can't make for a mistake. It would be too big to just switch views or anything. You need to be sure. So if I read something, I also read the critique on it, and I went back to my favorite apologist, and I listened back and forth and back and forth, and it was a year and a half of non-stop lit. I've never read so much in my life, but somehow, for some reason, it just slowly began to realize, even during that time, I never got to how are things. I just knew or realized, okay, there's a problem with this and this and this and this. So, and in the end, there was no view that there was not some form of valid critique. But I still wanted to be a Christian, preferably fundamentalist, because and I didn't have much of a life outside that, and or an identity. So eventually, when that fell, besides not having career plans, that was the least of my worries. My entire view of the world and myself, and everything that gave meaning to my life, it was just as if it was impossible.
Right.
For me, it could not be possible
Right.
that I had all the error theories, so that you're being tested, tempted, that this is just liberal. So I literally, because I wanted to stay as I was. I wasn't eager. It wasn't deliberate.
Yes. Yes.
So
It
yeah,
sounds to me as though you were delving into the Bible looking for certainty, and in fact, you found doubt.
not just the Bible. Everything related to every theological subject,
Yes.
and related issue about belief in God, and also because I still had that experience from my younger days that I talked about.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I couldn't, I mean, and that was still very real. And I even began to reading up more on the psychology of religion. Obviously, first the conservative ones that I liked, and on everything, the sociology of it. And because I still wanted to be a Christian, I tried to slide down the spectrum as little as possible. If I couldn't be a fundamentalist, just let me be a conservative in these things. If I
Yes.
couldn't be that moderate, so eventually it's just, but it's not so much that I delved more and more into the Bible. That was happening anyway, but it's more a case of the more I realized, because the interpretation is open still, but the more I realized, okay, the reason why people prefer this interpretation is because they've for so long read this reinterpreted Bible and been told what it means, that by the time they read it for themselves, they can only see what they associate with every word.
Yes.
So by the time they read the word God, they bring in all this baggage of the later concepts of God. So it never occurs to them in translation or otherwise that it might not be what they think. So,
Jaco,
yes.
I'm thinking, you and I've had a long conversation on this topic, and I know from my own experience, although I think in your case, because your entire identity, your career, your future was based on your belief in and your Christianity. But how long was there a moment when you said to yourself, I am an atheist? When did you use the A word to yourself for the first time? And I know that the whole process took you best part of a decade of your life, that you spent more mourning the loss of what Christianity meant to you. And to me, that is what is so profound about the stories of people like Jaco. And there are many people like Jaco.
Yes.
often when I tell people that I used to be a Christian and I'm no longer a Christian, and they say, "Oh, it's because the church hurt you. You had a bad experience." I didn't. No,
No.
and that's such a limiting
Yes.
view of people who lose their faith. I hope that hearing your story opens other atheists and also Christians up to the trauma of losing your faith. And your story was extremely poignant to me. So tell us about that moment when you said,
Well,
I'm
before
an atheist.
you do, Jaco, as the devout atheist here, I'd like to say that I get that sort of accusation. I get, you obviously hate God. You know, that's why you're not a Christian. It's because you hate God and you want to do naughty things, and therefore you've rejected God because he's good. So you're not alone in being accused of all sorts of nefarious thoughts and activities.
Well, actually, thank you. Actually, I don't think I was actually ever accused of those things. People was more trying to help me, saying that trying to help me get back where they thought I should be.
Yeah.
And other people, that was the other fundamentalists, or fundamentalists like Christians who wanted to help this brother. And the more liberal, people with more liberal views thought this is liberating, so they can't really understand
What the problem is.
Yeah.
Well, I get it, but it's not supposed to be such a depth of mourning. Now, I just have to add to that, I realized over time that even though there are similarities, everybody is a bit different, also in the reasons why and in their own journeys. So the moment I didn't want to be atheist. I mean, that was the last thing I wanted. Not because, it just never occurred to me. That was like, I mean, it was impossible in my mind that I mean, there could be differences in views, but that the whole thing could be wrong. The whole
Right.
thing could be a mistake.
Right.
It was. I mean, I often use analogies from movies like The Matrix or The Truman Show. But to be honest, people say when you lose your faith in God, it's like this gap. But it's really not just that, because what happens is, I think some philosophers have also pointed it out, because your ethics drives you towards, in this quest for truth, that you shouldn't be worshipping idols or false views, and you shouldn't deceive yourself, and should have humility and be able to criticize yourself and admit you're wrong. So you keep on doing that, but then to find out that the thing that is wrong is the very thing that also tells you with this ethics. So this ethics then destroys the dogmas or the beliefs, or assists you with that. And then what happens first is you don't just drop the ethics. When the dogmas or the beliefs crash, you still keep the ethics. So, and it makes you more passionate to find out, okay, well, that was such an important thing for me. So now I must find the truth. And the next thing I must do, I must become like an inverted missionary to whatever the truth is. And so by the time I went through all the types of Christianity, because I really just wanted to stay Christian. I really did not want to. And for 10 years, I didn't think I was going to make it, not being one. But so, of course, there's this confusion and bitterness. So in the beginning, it's like people differ. Okay, so many people again differ in this, but I realized I couldn't be upset at any of the university people who teach, because they are just discussing the research with me, and it was none of that made me doubt. And because they were really, I was like learning what's going on out there. It just broadened my background of what's aware, but I felt in control because I just knew who I was, and now I was better equipped to know who everybody was wrong. So, but now when I'm out, I realize I can't blame them, because they were really not trying to deconvert anybody. And if some students find something shocking, it was never meant to be prescriptive. It's you can still hold your own views. So then I also thought, but I can't blame God because He doesn't exist. So it doesn't make. I'm not angry at God. I can't blame the church because what is the church actually? It's such a
Yeah.
broad, vague term. I can't blame any of the pastors or ministers because many of them are really sincere and they were just doing what they were doing.
Yes.
They were not trying to deceive me. I can't blame my parents because really they wanted the best for me.
We're doing the best. Yes.
I can't blame myself because I just wanted to be what I thought was literally for me the best life and the most important thing you could do with your life. And I was enjoying it. So, and I, of course, so now what happens is, okay, but there's still this outrage again. All this is still going on with other people, and they don't know it, they don't see it. So, do I not have a duty to
Yes.
as I
Yes.
was going to be a missionary in the beginning, do I not have a duty now to help them out of
Yes.
that?
Yes.
And
Because
what
now
happened
you're.
was, in the beginning, I was very then critical of religion. I started joining forums. I started debating. I actually started in my own academic work because even though I lost my faith, I had nothing else that I was interested in but religion and that.
Academics,
But it
yes.
wasn't the same. The magic was gone. It was, but it's still there was so. And then I learned on the forums. It does not matter if you explain to everybody what you learned from James Barr and so on, because everybody comes from a slightly different angle. They come with these things that you know, that you yourself thought that you are just either being tested, or it's just the liberal assumptions that make you doubt, or it's some test, or you've gone astray, and you know all these things because they were those things that you yourself diagnosed yourself with.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So
So.
I was a very angry atheist at that time for about 10 years.
Mhm.
But my personality depends on your personality. So I was more like arguing in text, but it was still difficult for me because in my heart I was not. I was still hoping to wake up someday, but I was still 13 or so, and this was just one long nightmare,
Days.
daymare.
Yes. Yes.
So it just didn't seem real to me. But the problem is, it's not just a hole in your world that's gone, this God hole. It's because God is all the value. God is everything, and the world isn't worth much. And your own value and your meaning in life, everything gets value because of God. What you lose, it's not a gap in reality. That includes not only the death of God, it's the death of the self, it's the death of life, meaning, and purpose. And you
Value. Yeah.
but not in the sense of that you don't have morals or anything, because immediately your social conditioning and your biology kicks in that shows
I'm
you
glad,
that you're not really a very different person as
I'm
an
glad
atheist
you.
than you were.
I'm glad you.
Because
Can I just come in here? Because I'm glad you said that, Jaco. And earlier you said you still had your ethics. And I believe this is because it's inherited. We are genetically disposed to, as social animals, to cooperate and generally be good to each other. And that's how Homo sapiens has become such a successful creature. But
I think, yeah, there are levels to it. There's different cultural contexts for ethics, but so there are levels, aspects of ethics which are related to what you do in relation to your beliefs. So that part was gone because the ethics related to worship and that, and not, but the ethics, as you say, about compassion and not wanting to do bad stuff.
yes,
Um,
babies
uh,
have. If you
it's
severe
yes, because
with
it's
babies.
so it's yes, it's you don't just turn into something else, even though you might be at some points become paranoid or worried what's going to happen now with
And
me, and am I
and
going
to counteract this natural tendency, as I say, that babies show, you have to teach them to hate.
So you also realize that there are some things that you are because you're a human animal, and of course there are people with degrees and so in context that push people to do things, but there are some things that, as you say, are, although it's culturally conditioned and so on, that just didn't disappear. And so, of course,
Yes,
some things, I've been programming myself for Christianity for so long that
yes,
some things you can still say is Christian. But I mean, it's like a computer that there are some things that are not going to be compatible with me because I've been in it for so long that
yes,
just
yes,
some of the software will still be running there because I can't update them. And
yes.
some people will still think I'm like this, but you can't just, there are some
We,
things you can't just flip a switch and now you're different. So
yes, yes.
um,
Well, we now think, in fact, we know, we've done experiments that show that some animals, I'm talking about animals in the non-human sense of animals now, have domesticated themselves. They have tried to fit in with the society that they find themselves in, and very often it's a human society that can provide them with food and the wherewithal, and so they have behaved suitable to be our friends, as it were. And you've got a dog, and Tercia and I have cats. She's got a, I don't know how many dogs you have at the moment, Tercia, but I know you've had some. And
One dog.
one at the moment, right? It's okay. So the thing is here, this is innate behavior tendencies, and what
yes,
you were doing, it seems to me, earlier in your life, is psychologically reprogramming yourself along some non-innate behavior from some controlist dogma that was trying to make you fit into an anti-human perspective in order to suit the leaders of that particular.
yeah. I think, and with all respect, I see where you're coming from, and there is a sense in which it is different from some baseline forms of compassion and so on. But while in the beginning I thought it was just like this unnatural thing, or the programming or so. That was that was how I think everybody used to think, that if you religion indoctrinates you to something that's not human or natural. And I thought like that for a decade, and people can still, everybody's have a right to the view, I guess. For me now, I literally, one of the hardest things was, you always think about when you're a Christian and you feel like a bit superior, and all the other
Yes,
people, cultures are so lost and wayward and children of
yes,
their time and context, and they're just so captive to their context. And
yes.
now to have to admit that you yourself were like that, to
I,
look at yourself from the future, and that
I,
you're just, and to realize that you were the most
yes,
you were the most human centered. You say always atheists are like humans, too much human centered. But the thing is, I
yes,
mean, there's nothing much more human centered to think that the cosmos is controlled by a human like creature, that
yes.
everything is about humanity, and
You
that
have a hotline
the
to
most
him.
important. So it's even more. So long story
It's
short, what happens there is, although I still don't agree with the religious dogmas or ideas, and although I do think there are elements of that are not conducive to certain social forms of harmony. If I'm consistent on a biological level, then we humans seem to be animals who live in the world through culture. So everything we do, everything we produce, whether religion, politics, everything, you can say this is more or less destructive or relative to a certain value or aim, but it may be based on mistaken perceptions or a problem for a certain society. But for me, everything is still natural. even if humans come up with stories, even if they live in a fantasy world. I mean, the evidence, the historical evidence, is that's what humans seem to do. Even if we yes, there's some biology there, mammal attachment, mirror neurons on a more deeper level, emergent properties on a level of where you in a certain society. But if we are consistent, then even our superstitions, our misguided for millennia and longer, all those times when nothing and nobody tried to correct humanity on what they were thinking, people were just doing what they were doing, spinning up all these worlds and imaginary worlds. So yes, the products of imagination or sometimes doesn't have a counterpart outside it, and can have an effect in society which really hurts people. But to imagine things is part of reality. To be deluded or mistaken is part of reality. The human animal, like a dog barking in thunder, or a gorilla who shouts at the sky. Even our most dysfunctional, most superstitious forms of behavior, for me, that's not so much unnatural as, I don't know what one would call it, but I don't think if we are consistent, there's nothing we can do that's not human or natural. So I don't make this absolute dualism between, even now today, theism and atheism. I mean, there is a sense in which atheism had to come, or not had to, but for the current era, it doesn't mean much without the opposition in theism. If nobody believed anymore, I don't think it would be so necessary to label ourselves atheists, because we are not. It's almost a negative identity, because you don't believe. It's not about what you believe, although it does, but it has become associated. If you say to people nowadays you're an atheist, like almost in some contexts, not everywhere, in some contexts, it's like their old religion. They don't think you just don't believe in a God, or they also think, okay, you also believe in evolution, in this cosmology, in this and that, and it's fine. But technically, the term is not about that. And there are some people who have not enough knowledge of biology or cosmology to be able to make any claims on that level. But it has, and there are various degrees of atheism and varieties. So it's not about. I did call myself an atheist, and I was like an inverted missionary, and I think I appreciate the role of people who try to do that social justice thing where they try to see where religion causes really social problems, and try to have people worship things that are not real, like one did as one Christian, but now not for the God reason. So, but for me, I don't know. And again, it's just personal. At the moment, I'm almost postmodern, but I don't want to say it because it has its own caricatures. So
yeah,
I don't want to. I'm obviously some things, but I don't know. I couldn't stay stuck there either. I felt life is too short. I can't keep my life. And I appreciate there's a need for people who keep on debating and so on. But for me personally, I thought, because it was so hurtful and traumatic.
Yes.
If I don't stop all my argumentation, debating, I'm never getting over that, because it's triggered every time I have to argue with people about it.
Yes.
Then it's really painful for me because of who I was. So I needed to move on from that atheism to cope. But for other people, I'm grateful for people like you guys.
John,
I can see the struggle you're having, Jaco.
Yeah.
I'm not so much having a struggle, but I just know there are some losses in life, even if it's imaginary.
Yes.
You just live with it, and I got too attached, and I didn't have a balanced life outside of
Yeah.
that. And
Yes.
and also because I have a bit of OCD, so I get stuck related to Tourette's. So I get stuck in it takes me long to adapt, and I get stuck, especially if I have sad thoughts. It's difficult to. I take longer to work through it, and because I'm very creative, I can. Before I left, I got really creative, thinking of reasons of why it still might be true. So whatever people might think I'm smart, it just made me smarter, trying to think of reasons, more ad hoc hypothesis of why I might actually have.
Yes. Yes.
And there's still a loss, and there's still some things I miss about it, but I don't know everything. But here's the thing: you don't need to know everything
But
to
nobody.
know that it's false in a certain sense. You just need to know enough. Or there's a certain if there are certain things that are not true, it does not matter the rest of the details. It just I don't know.
If
It's
I
like
can
you don't have to like know everything about any other god, any other religion to think it's not true. There are some things relative to what we assume by truth, although that gets complicated too. Even if you redefine truth, it just wouldn't be the same.
the part that I liked about what you just said, Jaco, is that for you personally, activism is painful, and you don't want to go back there. But what I liked about what you said, that I actually should have written it down. Even reality is making up stories. That's part of our reality. And I think, as atheists and as an atheist activist, I think something that is important that we can do is perhaps not so much argue and debate with believers, although there's a place for that, but just push the boundaries of what stories they are able and willing to tell themselves. Because
Yeah.
if you can move into that space where you can realize even reality is made up of the fictions that we tell ourselves. And then if you can get across that barrier, then it opens you up to at least begin. It doesn't necessarily have to be the end of your belief in gods or superstitions or whatever. But if it can open you up to be more accepting of the fact that our beliefs are made up, and that
Yeah.
even a very sincere experience can be completely wrong and incorrect. And for me, that's important because it creates more empathy in how we go about our lives with one another. But before the time is running out, you said earlier, and it was, you said that in your studies, a little bit of the magic of what you were studying was lost. I do hope that you have recaptured some of that magic, and that's why I want to ask you about what was, as a scholar, what do you enjoy most about your life at the moment, engaging with this in particular language, and how has that opened up your view of the story of God, and specifically within the Judeo-Christian context, although I do think it might touch upon the Muslim aspect as well, because to me that is something really fascinating. And you, with your knowledge of language, and just the fact that we have so many different names, Christians have so many different names for God. And so I'm quite active on Facebook groups, and it's so fascinating to me how nowadays it's a big thing in South African religious circles to not talk about God or Jesus or Christ, but to talk about Yahweh or what is the other, Abba. So Christians will say, "Oh, Abba told me today," which is just the names. Would you, in the last 4 minutes, just tell us a little bit about how did you recapture the magic of yours in your scholarly life, and just something about these names of gods?
Yeah. So my scholarly life also didn't go where I wanted to. In theology, I was much more interested in what people would call dogmatics or systematic theology, which is why I also took philosophy. and that is more like where all the beliefs or the dogmas of faith, although it depends on whether the variety of systematic theology or dogmatics, but I did not like. Obviously, the Bible was sacred, but the Old Testament was not my preference. So the only reason I ended up in Old Testament was at the time, around 2000. At that time, it was the most, you could say, most liberal subject group of theology where I was, in the sense that most of them, almost all of them, are believers, but they are more live and let live of whoever you're at. And in biblical scholarship, I learned overseas, which I couldn't comprehend in the beginning, that there are people who study the Bible but they're not Christians at all. And I couldn't wrap my head around it. So I thought the only way I was going to survive, I'm in Old Testament because that's the only place I can function without. But I'm not so much interested there. So I went for books like Ecclesiastes and Job or the wisdom text, and I still liked philosophy. So I thought, look, there are not many types of philosophical approaches. I'm going to have to find a way to have a historically more legitimate way of looking at the text while combining it with my interest in philosophy, because 95% of my own subject is, to be honest, boring for me. But what happened was I somehow got to do that, and what I try to tell myself that everything I study, even the text that now has a better aftertaste, I should try to see things as interesting rather than, because if you now read the old passages that you read as devotionals, and you remember how you thought about them, and now you know more about historical context and social and ideology and other stuff. So what happens is I now realize that, and this is why one can't go back. You realize that everything has a history: the Bible, the concept of God, the concept of Christ, everything, every concept, the concept of heaven and hell. That's also why people get rid of their fears. If sometimes some of the fears I had was, okay, all this is false, but what if I'm wrong and there's still a hell? So then you read about the history of the concept of hell, and then or God. So now when people say, what about hell? Then you ask which version, or what about God, which version? So you can't just believe or just this or that. So it's almost therapeutic to know. In the beginning, it was horrific to know that everything has a history because it's supposed to be the eternal truth. But in the end, that can be therapeutic, although for the fear part. And then just to close, I won't be long. So I have all my colleagues, I think, all my colleagues and most scholars are still believers, liberal or conservative. For me to function, the best way is to let people be themselves. And I rather now try to meet everybody where they're at, because I remember when I was in it very deep and people said things outside perspective, I could not for the life of me see where they were coming from. And I really thought they were not true Christians, or this is the reason why they're thinking that. And so I know, relative to saying where they're thinking, and this is some of the things, if one comes from an atheist perspective, really reason and critical thinking is not going to solve everything, because it can help you with coherency in your arguments, but there's so much because religion is not primarily based on reason. People don't, unless for some people think they start believing for reasons. It's not just reasons that get people out. So there's so much connected to it, and if you come from the atheist viewpoint, it does not just help to show people things about dogmas or help them with that ethics part. It's all the assumptions by which these things, on which they stand. If that basic things are not dislodged, then the same mindset continues. And then in the end, it is really complicated why some people can see all the information and still be this or still be that. And for me, maybe it's a rationalization to help me cope with my job, because I would never have thought that I would even be interested in theology if I wasn't a believer. I mean, what would I be doing there? But now I've really, the more different it is, I've somehow sublimated it to become interesting. Also other religions. And so I have colleagues who are Muslims, colleagues who are Christians of various denominations, and other colleagues. And so I try to meet them at the human level, and I don't know, but maybe it's just me. So I can't say why people should or shouldn't, or this is what works for everybody. It's just how. But you have to remember, this system of religion, of Christianity, besides the prehistory, has evolved for 2,000 years. It has covered everything. All these objections against it, the text, these are old. It's not new. People every 20 years it's an old of it again. But the old Romans and others, many others before that, the Greeks, they're all in their own religion. So
they have lots of responses.
And they've already, so there's nothing that they haven't covered. So it's not a matter of, like in the Christian, just tell them and hopefully they will be convinced by the atheist version of the Holy Spirit reason, and then they will just see the light. It doesn't happen that way. It's much more complicated.
Giving
us if in the way some people go about it, it does not help. Because I remember, sorry, maybe that's for another discussion about more focus on atheism, maybe for the next time. I don't want to go over you guys' time. I want to give you a chance. Sorry, I tend to rant.
Don't worry. No. You've used some very interesting words. You said it wasn't your preference to deal with the Old Testament. And then you said it didn't really interest me. And that points up to what I think is the fact that we choose what we believe, and we like it to be attractive. Otherwise, we don't want to delve into it very deeply.
John, don't go there now.
I can just say what wasn't so interesting for me was not the Old Testament per se, because I've already read it with rose-colored glasses or faith-colored.
Yes.
That was interesting. What wasn't interesting was the scholarship, which I eventually came to work in.
Yes.
And its focus, because it just wasn't as interesting as New Testament or systematic theology or even other theological subjects. Because there's a lot of...
It's not such a story, is it? So,
and part of the reason was also you don't just read the text. You always read it through some method or approach, or school of thought, even if you're not in academia. Because the ministers in the church has learned something from it. Doesn't matter if they're fundamentalists. So nobody just reads. That you can't just read.
You bring your bias and you want to get it confirmed.
Well, if you are really serious on faith, people don't call it a bias, and they would say it's just you read it in line with the faith as a guidance. So you can say to them it's a bias. But from their perspective, it's not a bias, and if it was, it's still the correct bias. So it would not help to just tell them it's a bias, because they would be proud of that bias.
Yes, there's no arguing, really, is there?
I mean, if the Holy Spirit's biased, then, that's how you think.
Yes, it is. Yes, it's the human tendency to want to be right. Yes. So I'm sorry, guys. We really have run out of time. And I don't know who we've got coming next week, but I know it'll be another interesting guest. Because we've had two in a row, haven't we, Tercia? We had Tim Mills last week, who is also a nearly missionary who's turned into an anti-missionary. He thinks it's his job now to rescue other potential victims from the depths of pit that he fell into. And but I've got 2 or 3 people I'm fishing with at the moment, trying to get them to reel in, and I just haven't got dates for them. So you and I need to look at the calendar together.
That's right. John, just before we go, very briefly, and I'm responding to one of the comments there was a question. I actually put my glasses on, just the reason I don't wear these glasses is they're multifocal. And if I want to see up close, I have to lift my head up, and then everybody can look up my nostrils. So I want to spare you guys that. So somebody asked about recommendations of books about psychology of religion. So perhaps we can ask Jaco afterwards. But
Yes.
I do want to make special mention of Jaco's collaboration with Gericke from the Myth Vision podcast. Jaco, was it your doctoral thesis that was basically reworked into an episode? People can check that out. Do you have the title close by? If people...
Yeah, because I wanted to be sure I wasn't making a mistake. I tried to word all the reasons why I couldn't believe, and I was having to be specialized. So relative to the Old Testament, why I find it difficult to believe that God as depicted in the Old Testament exists, where I specialized, and in 2004 I completed that PhD. It was the title. It's available as a PDF. Does Yahweh exist? And then there's a subtitle. You can just type, does Yahweh exist? Gericke, University of Pretoria. They'll find all the chapters and everything there. Gericke had a podcast on it. I'm a bit, it's 20 years in the making for me, but he happened upon it. He thought it was a book. At the time, I thought I might write a book, but that time has passed. And it's a bit long, that podcast, but it's my own fault because I sent the wrong script. But yeah, so that was like different reasons, like arguments against the existence of Yahweh, but not so it's not this philosophy of religion, all the same problems as in, okay, the language is meaningless, or it's just a problem of evil, or this argument against. It's specifically tailored to Old Testament context, and then from there on, anyone can build up on that. Because so that is the Myth Vision podcast. I did it for him because he thought it would be good for his audience, and this is now currently my relation to that scene is when I get an invitation, I talk about it, or I share some of the things, and there I feel if it can help somebody, then fine. But as for psychology of religion, again, people can really just Google. But like all books, they just have to know. You can check the publisher and so on. Read everything, but you can check the publisher because usually publishers are also aligned with conservative or critical agendas. So, but if you just Google psychology of religion and you go to Google Books or Google Scholar, you will find it. And it's basically psychology and various theories there. And some are positive towards religion, but they discuss everything from the psychology, different perspectives, critical for and against, on conversion experiences, what's happening with you that you feel it's so real, deconversion even. There's different names for that. I thought died again Christian was all right, but other people have different names for it. So there's a lot of creative stuff there, and it's interesting. For me, anything is interesting if it's relevant. So and they can just Google that, and in any
And if you want
to find all that in the bibliography of that thesis as well.
That's Myth Vision, folks. Does Yahweh exist? And if you want something from a philosopher, then
that Myth Vision podcast, his marketing department choose a catchy title. So the title is not "Does Yahweh exist?" I didn't choose the title. It's "They Lie to Us About the God of the Bible." That's the title of the podcast. I didn't choose that. I would have chosen "Does Yahweh exist?" But it's his podcast, and I'm happy for him. So you will see. You can just Google "They Lied About the God of the Bible," and if you click on that podcast, it starts with "Does Yahweh exist?"
God of the Bible, Myth Vision, right? So, if you wanted a philosopher's view, you could look at A.C. Grayling's. Where is this? Come on, why is that not going?
That is my other interest, philosophy of religion. I also teach, although I don't teach atheism per se, but I did. Philosophy of religion is the other thing I specialize in, and I've read things. Although I do think some of it has gone a bit.
So do you probably know A.C. Grayling's The God Question?
Yeah, but he wasn't a philosopher of religion by specialization, but he did contribute to it. So in philosophy of religion, you have theist and atheist, and you have different philosophical traditions working with that. A.C. Grayling's was more popular writing, but look, everybody contributes in their own way. But there's a lot of it, and it's still a course at university. So in many
Yes, yes.
universities, although it
Yes,
wasn't when I was there, so which I had to read.
I think this is historical. Jaco, you're the first person I know that John has somehow managed us to allow us to go 10 minutes over time. And I would like to thank you. I knew it was going to be nice. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your open,
Absolutely.
honest conversation. And who knows, we might do this again because I think there's a lot more to dig into. Yes, Jaco, it was lovely. I'm going to say goodbye because I have to find out who won the major darts game that's going on upstairs. I don't know if you guys can hear it.
Okay, right.
But thanks, Tarsha.
Goodbye.
Thanks to you and John.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, and thanks for bearing with me. And I appreciate everything.
And happy doubting.
Thank you.
And same to you guys as well, and to all the listeners. And I'll probably overthink what I've said after this, but
Don't just go with it.
yeah, no, I've realized I can't fight that. It's just how it is. So
You can always-
I hope you have a good night. But yeah,
You can always join in the debate underneath the podcast.
no. I promise you, in 5 minutes, I'll start thinking about things. Oh, I should have said that. Why didn't I? And then I will feel bad because I talked so long and interrupted you guys so much.
We had fun.
But that's the
Lovely.
attention
Thank you.
deficit. So I have excuses, but I have explanation, but not an excuse. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
On that note, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Enjoy your darts.